One of the important topics in research ethics is the concept of clinical equipoise. Clinical equipoise means that when you want to do a research, before you do your research, if you know that one treatment is more useful than the other one, or one treatment is useful and the other one is harmful, you have an ethical responsibility here, because you are giving favor to one group and you are harming or depriving one group from some useful treatment. So you're only supposed to do this kind of research if you're not sure about the effectiveness of your treatments. Another thing is that it's not enough to make a consent form or agreement and have your participant to sign it. You gotta make sure that they read it and they understand it. So for example, if their English is not good and your consent form is in English, you have to create another copy in their native language so they can read it and make sure that they understand it. The other issue in research is when you ask for volunteers. There's nothing wrong with asking for volunteers to participate in a research. But if your participants feel that they are forced to participate, then that's unethical. Probably the most important concept in this chapter is the concept of deception. Deception is used when you know that if you tell your participants the truth about the goal of your research, their behavior is going to change and they may lie, or they may pretend, or they may behave differently. So sometimes you have to use deception. There are two types of deception. Passive deception is when you don't tell them the whole truth. You hide some information from your participant. The active deception is when you misinform them. You don't tell them the truth and you give them another explanation which is not right, which is not honest. So, are we allowed to use deception? According to APA, yes. You can do it, but only if the benefit of your research outcome is significantly higher than the risk for the participants. And you got to make sure that you consider all other alternatives before you decide to use deception. And if you use deception, you don't simply let them go, let your participants go before you tell them the truth. So you have to have a debriefing meeting with them and you tell them why that you use deception and why you use deception, and you answer all their questions, and if they're not happy, they can withdraw their information from your research. You're also responsible for the confidentiality of your data that you collect, and you gotta make sure that your participants' records are kept anonymous so nobody knows who answered what or who behaved this way or that way in your research. You also need to know about IRB, or the Institutional Review Board. That means whenever you want to do a research, you're supposed to submit a proposal to your IRB committee. Most organizations, they have a board that you submit your proposal and they check all the ethical rules in your proposal before they let you to go ahead and conduct your research. So the second part of this chapter is about the ethical issues related to scientific integrity. What does it mean? That when you are reporting your research findings, you're not supposed to manipulate or fabricate data. And if you make an honest mistake in reporting, you're supposed to report the correction as soon as you find it out. For example, If your article is already published, you send a correction to the journal editor and tell them that you have made a mistake. And of course, you're not supposed to submit somebody else's research as your own. Also important is the difference between error and fraud. I think the best example I've seen is in the attached video, in which a university professor, he claims that it's a simple or honest mistake, but when you watch this video you can see that this is so. What can we do against fraud? What can we do to make sure that the ethical guidelines have been followed in the research? First, like I said, we have the IRB that they check your research before you even start collecting data. But even after you collect data and you report the results, for example, to a journal, there's always a group of people who review your paper, and usually if there is anything wrong, they detect it and they ask you to correct it before they publish it. But even after you publish it, if somebody thinks that there is a problem with your research, there's always possible to replicate the data to see if they come with the same conclusions. A related concept to fraud is plagiarism. We all know that we are not supposed to copy the whole thing or copy a large part of a research or a book and use it in our own paper. But sometimes there is a misunderstanding or a confusion among some students that they see, an interesting idea, a nice phrase, a catchy word, and they use it in their research. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to give them the credit. So my final words are that as you're going through your literature review, you write down everything that you get from other resources. You take a complete notes, any words, any ideas, and write down the citation right away. If it's a direct quote, use quotation marks with the page number. And of course, you're not supposed to use too many direct quotes. And whenever you are in doubt that some ideas are yours or somebody else, it's better to go and recheck and make sure that anything that comes with other resources, they are given the credit and their work is cited in your research.